Thank you, everybody. Thank you for joining us. My name is John Stenhouse, and I'm the Business Support Manager at the University of Essex. This is part of the Angels at Essex and Space to Grow Investment Readiness Programme, brought to you by the University of Essex and Essex County Council. And today our topic is manufacturing in the east of England and in the UK. I have with me today Josh Clark, who's helping with the administration of the webinar, and Charlotte Horobin from Make UK and Keith Ferguson from BDO Accountants. They will be presenting later as we go through today's webinar. Now, this is a two-way traffic because we run these webinars for your benefit. So we like to know whether or not these are appropriate and what other webinars you would like to hear from. So please let us know because it's important to us. You are important to us. With manufacturing in the UK and within the east of England, we have seen a rise in the number of businesses approaching us with ideas for manufacturing products, whether that's for sale in the UK or exporting. But there is definitely an increased trend in businesses asking for advice and support on manufacturing and coming to us for support on investment readiness to actually raise the funding to do that. And it's proving a lot more popular than you would realize. So we've invited Make UK and BDO Accountants along today who are specialists in manufacturing. If they don't know the answers, they certainly know the people who will do. And I would like to introduce you to Charlotte Horobin. Charlotte, please introduce yourself and tell us all about Make UK.
So my name is Charlotte Horobin. I'm the Region Director across the Midlands and the East of England for an organisation called Make UK. So we're the national body that represents UK manufacturing, a privately owned organisation backed by over 22,000 makers, from the very small up to some of the biggest brands that you'd recognise, automotive through to aerospace, pharmaceutical through to food. So we've got a really amazing melting pot for businesses to be able to share best practice, develop supply chains, solve their problems, and ultimately our raison d'etre is to champion manufacturing and provide the environment to help you to grow. We're in our 126th year. Those of you that have been in the sector for a number of years will perhaps recognise the brand EEF, the Engineering Employers Federation. So that's the limited entity which sits behind the trading brand of Make UK. I'm very delighted to be here today. I've worked with John for a number of years, who's always been an avid supporter of the manufacturing sector and has generously shared his time with our board members over the years. I'm also very pleased to be here with Keith, who is a colleague at BDO. Make UK and BDO have a long-standing relationship because we produced together a really important economic survey, which is called our Manufacturing Outlook survey. So this has been in existence for nearly 3 decades now, and this provides insight and data as to how the manufacturing sector is feeling and also forecasts for the future. So extremely useful for business leaders who are looking to plan their business, thinking about the future, and also for those wanting to make those strategic moves, perhaps diversifying and moving into other sectors. And dare I say, actually, it's a lonely position at the top. So for those that are facing a difficult future or circumstance, it's sometimes nice to know that you're not on your own. In terms of UK manufacturing, we probably get very hung up about the fact that manufacturing is cited as 10% of UK GDP and fight against this quite fiercely. Hopefully you're all aware that manufacturing contributes to over half of the exports in the country, so bringing that true wealth back, 2/3 of R&D, and is employing in excess of 2.5 million people in the most productive and actually highly paid sector in the UK. We've also got an incredibly diverse manufacturing sector, and that's especially true in the east of England, where we see food and drink, electronics, mechanical equipment manufacturing, agri-tech. This really bodes for a very resilient and exciting region to be a part of. So in terms of what did we see at the end of the year, and I'm just going to take some time to walk through some slides that our very clever economists put together in a health warning. I understand this data very well. I've looked at it for over a decade, but I'm not an economist. So if you want to get involved with that type of engagement, you must book onto the Q1 2022 Make UK and BDO outlook presentation, but for today I'll take you through the scores on the doors, but I do hope that there's some interesting questions and discussion points, as my role day to day very much is engaging with tens of business leaders. So what you can see in front of you here is the balance of output and orders. You can see the output presented in the red colour bar and orders presented in the orange. Now this is the balance, so it's showing the change of direction of travel as opposed to magnitude. Now what you'll notice in 2020 was contractions like we'd never seen before. But since then, we've seen multiple quarters of growth, with Q2 and Q3 in 2021 showing record-breaking results. Now, Q4, the end of last year, that growth continued, but perhaps not as intense. So you'll see in the title here, output and orders growth unexpectedly slows. Now, the reason we've used the phrase unexpectedly is that actually manufacturers in Q3 were forecasting greater growth into Q4. What you'll also notice is that the orders are exceeding output, and this really is reflecting some of the challenges and, dare I say it, kind of the wiring behind the panel, and the supply chain issues, the fact that manufacturers are probably struggling to keep up due to a lack of input materials, resources such as the people that they need, and also the rising costs that we're facing. Brilliant news in the east of England, the total orders in the region actually reached a balance of positive 75%, which was the best performance of any UK region and a very strong figure by our historical standards. So please don't think that that slowdown at the end of the year was a negative. We actually think it's possibly slightly healthy and hopefully a gap of air for manufacturers to be able to try and catch up. We've of course had some unexpected changes towards the end of last year. I don't think anybody could have forecast the volatility that we've seen in, say, the energy market, and also things like the Omicron variant coming to fruition. So that's perhaps why we're seeing those expectations tempered. If we look now at the domestic versus the export market, again, you'll see a very familiar narrative, a decline in 2020. However, we did see outstanding growth in 21. We saw domestic growth actually recovering at the back end of 2020. And actually, you know, that slower picture on the export side, we perhaps signpost to a couple of things. So, you know, domestic growth coming through, export is coming through, but perhaps it's been slightly delayed. We've of course had significant changes to the way that we, our relationship with the EU, but we've also got the pandemic recovery starting to, you know, feed into these figures as well. On the export side, we typically see the EU as the biggest market, followed by North America and Asia, and that has remained the same. But we are seeing demand from Europe improving. Again, we don't quite know how yet to interpret this. Actually, is the improvement from the EU because businesses moved goods early and in anticipation of the changes at the start of this year regarding import controls. For the east of England, exports are extremely important, and actually those strong order figures, the balance that I reported earlier of plus 75%, we would say very much is down to a strong domestic market, but also those overseas orders that are so important to the region, both of which for the east of England were above the national average, and reflects actually that the world's markets and the domestic economy are improving. The UK order balance of plus 67% for the east of England was also the best performance of any UK region, and actually comes off the back of what have been some weaker quarters for the east of England. Thinking about demand for materials, and what we've done here is questioned around industries that supply intermediate goods, so the kind of linchpins in supply chains. You can see here that the order bars are higher than the output bars. Again, shows those difficulties that we've got in supply chains. And this is not just about semiconductors. And interestingly, my patch does cover automotive dense areas like the West Midlands, so very much in the thick of semiconductor issues. But what I did notice towards the end of last year was members in the east of England in medical device manufacture, much broader sector, saying, hang on a minute, we're really struggling because of these shortages now as well. Also, aside from semiconductors, it's across a number of commodities, whether you're making windows or, you know, looking for timber. I think it's been well cited in the press, but we are certainly seeing these intermediate goods, big challenges and bottlenecks. So that feeds us very nicely, I hope, onto prices and inflation. And I'd say that this has been the biggest narrative over the last quarter. So we've seen record-breaking growth in prices in the UK and for export goods. We've seen record-breaking growth for 3 quarters in a row, which has never happened before. And actually our manufacturing members are telling us that they're expecting more in 2022. Now this is born out of substantial demand, but also increasing costs such as energy, salaries, etc. And with this, we are seeing that margins or the margin growth has declined a little. So we're seeing that increased cost coming through, but perhaps faster than the rate that manufacturers are able to pass that on to the supply chain. So whilst we're seeing price rises, the cost pressures are actually rising faster, and that's therefore leading to this erosion on margins. We do see this in the manufacturing sector. It's very typical. Prices change. You've usually got a contract in place that will take time to negotiate between customer and suppliers, but we are expecting that margins should ease and improve into 2022. So confidence currently dips, but does remain positive, so we must remember that. Orders have slowed. We've seen that tempered expectation, but of course, as I've already described, lots of moving parts, energy, shortage of people, Omicron. So overall, I think if we take those sort of data sets on the right hand side without the preceding data, you'd say actually pretty optimistic still. Looking at another 2 really key measures for us, employment and investment intentions. So employment has grown quarter on quarter, but really not where manufacturers expected employment levels to be. They'd expected employment to be much higher. And we would say that this is due to the shortage of labour and a skills mismatch. Actually, behind the scenes, a lot of the kind of political commentators get very animated when we refer to a skills shortage and say, you know, this is a mismatch of skills. Our team found some interesting insight in the ONS data just before Christmas, where there were 4 vacancies for every 100 jobs in manufacturing. Normally that's just less than about 2, so that rate has actually doubled. We had lots of discussions around frustrations, the logistics sector, warehousing, distribution in the run up to Christmas, that sector boomed with massive sign-on rates. I am now starting to see that ease a little bit, but still I think the message is, you know, pay inflation, the shortage of skills that we need is absolutely rife still. In fact, this week we've just produced one of our key reports, a pay bulletin, and we've seen that pay increases have ranged from 1% to 14%. I've actually got an example that is exceeding 17% on the shop floor for the last 6 months. We're seeing just 2% of companies have freezed pay compared to a third last year, but the majority of settlements are sitting between 2 and 3%, which I think would probably surprise you all. I think the problem or the discrepancy is the shop floor and sort of skilled technical roles are seeing quite large increases, perhaps more managerial roles, not the same level. Looking at investment though, in isolation, that is still looking strong. The intentions have been scaled back, and we think that that's really due to the immediate pressures taking their toll. And we'd also perhaps question whether the government incentives have been quite enough to boost that confidence and enable finance directors, chief execs to press the button on those future investment plans. So just coming to a conclusion, manufacturing for 2021 closed relatively strong. However, we have revised forecast down slightly for 2022, so we're expecting growth of about 3.5% for manufacturing and 5.7% for the wider economy. Sentiments coming through to us from business leaders so far this year. 3/4 of businesses do expect conditions in manufacturing to improve. 2/3 still see the UK as a competitive location for manufacturing, but do think that leaving the EU has hampered their business. We are seeing increased input costs and a shortage of skills. There is a sentiment that COP26 has accelerated the drive towards net zero, and 1/3 of companies are looking to reshore production, similar number to replace their overseas suppliers with UK-based suppliers. So there is some opportunity there. So finally, in terms of Make UK and who we are and what we're doing, please do engage with us, do ask any questions that you might have. It's really hard sometimes for us to put on a tin what we do and how we support the business community. But as I say, networking with the likes of John and Keith, we really do want to collaboratively make sure that it's a really good place to make things here in the UK. Please, by all means, reach out. My contact details are there. And it's my pleasure to hand over to Keith, who's going to share his insights and the narrative that he's had talking to manufacturers so far this year. So Keith, over to you.
Thanks very much, Charlotte. Thank you. So I'm Keith Ferguson, a partner with BDO, and I head up our manufacturing representation for BDO in East Anglia, which is an interesting sort of subsector because it's actually the largest sector we have in terms of our clients. So BDO as a firm, it's the biggest subsector is manufacturing, which may seem strange to people. We may think we deal with other things, but it is actually our largest sector. And probably it's a good time for me to just quickly give a plug for some of the services we have for manufacturing, and particularly the startup companies. So we have a complete range of tax services, as you would expect. So we look at EIS, tax relief for shareholders, research and development claims, which are extremely valuable in terms of reducing tax bills, patent box, and a number of other sort of direct taxes. In terms of indirect taxes, we've VAT representation. We also have a duty team as well, and I'm going to come along and talk about a few bits and pieces in a minute, but duty concerns are rising given obviously our move away from the European Union. Transfer pricing, setting up European subsidiaries when you get there. These are all interesting subjects that we deal with. We also have a number of feeder firms that we work with. So we have small accountants firms, so that when people are setting up, they don't feel they have to use BDO for everything. And we work with those firms where we add in our specialist services. And that could be any one of the above I just mentioned, or it could be perhaps our high growth stage team who look at sort of additional funding for high growth companies. But my role really today isn't just to keep plugging away for BDO. It's really to bring you some snippets of the discussions and the direct discussions I've been having, which pretty much I keep nodding my head when Charlotte talks, because they keep backing up everything that's coming out of those surveys. And I'm just going to run through what we're sort of seeing. And you can take it in various sectors. So you start moving. Let's take food, because that's the biggest manufacturer in East Anglia, biggest area of manufacture. Is it really the issue in food is pricing and margin, and we're seeing interesting conversations between suppliers and customers that seem to be easing. So the conversations a little while back were very difficult for people to bring through their price inflation. that's now pretty much accepted, that as long as there's an open dialogue, that you can get to the price that makes sense. So it's that sector is has a lot of inflation pulling through it. Where's that coming from? The materials are commodities, so they're pretty much a worldwide open market. But the interesting one there is the wage cost, and Charlotte's referred to it, this sort of pull through from other sectors. So the wage inflation is not necessarily driven in the sector itself, but it's pulling through from other areas. And so if you sort of link that through to, well, what other areas? We're seeing very strange staff structures being adopted by small companies. So you have a manufacturer who redirected all their office staff before Christmas because they're very retail reliant, shall I say. And they redirected all their office staff into the warehouse because they just lost all their warehouse staff because Amazon are just down the road and offered large golden hellos to everybody. Then we create wage inflation because all the office staff realize that the warehouse team are getting paid more than them. So you end up in sort of extremely strange circles at the moment of wage rate inflation. And I can fully understand where Charlotte was coming from in terms of there are huge variations and reasons as to why those costs are particularly pulling through. So the cost base in terms of staff, yes, driven out of those statistics showing very high levels of, well, back to high levels of employment pre-pandemic. Charlotte also touched on supply in terms of semiconductors. Now, the last time Charlotte and I presented a few months ago, pretty much you just had to change what you were using based on whatever the sort of primary manufacturer perhaps of a product that you needed to use was able to get hold of. And that's easing slightly. I wouldn't say it's over, but it's easing slightly. So there's product available, but unfortunately you have to pay for it. And that, again, it can be extremely high prices, or you need to swap your sort of base manufacturing item, whatever you're putting into your process, in order to pick up perhaps some semiconductors that are available. So there's quite a bit of swapping going on there still. And I sort of mentioned if you can get hold of it, well, a bit of pressure still unexpectedly, I think, in the shipping industry, which of course has big impact on manufacturing. The thoughts from the shipping industry were that supply was going to be back to normal for this Chinese New Year, which is obviously our spring effectively. That's now been taken out by the shipping industry back to Chinese New Year 2023. So the supply issues are going to continue if they're based on shipping industry reroutes. So again, quite tricky. So it brings you through to UK supply, and this is where I think had some of the most interesting conversations recently. Talking to someone very recently, they have had to put their pricing up quite considerably. They've had no resistance to that pricing. But the biggest price increases they've had is that within their product range are a mix of items they directly import. So they manufacture in the UK, but they also have a range of products that they are bringing in. So they ended up with 60+% price increase in the imported items, and somewhere between 6 to 10% increase in the UK produced items. Added to which, of course, they are a lot more able to supply the UK based product. And Charlotte was talking about earlier this sort of reshoring, I think, of manufacturing. And we certainly get the feeling that people are looking at that seriously. And if they can, they will, because they're able to control the supply chain a lot easier basing it here. And we've all heard about the warehousing pressures there are in the UK in terms of demand. But obviously, if you can bring manufacturing back, and given those cost controls may be easier in the UK, then it probably assists with the ESG credentials of the businesses. I think Charlotte also mentioned energy and gas prices in particular, extremely difficult. But again, it's one of those ones where an open dialogue with the customer is the only way to deal with that, because everybody is aware of those energy increases, and therefore you have a straightforward conversation with your customer. It seems to be working. So we have, I guess, in general, a very healthy manufacturing sector, I'd say, in the East, and hopefully that's what Charlotte's numbers are showing as well. We have very few people who are struggling in terms of sort of facing any insolvency type procedures, although there were some concerns in a survey late last year that there might be a few people facing that, but I think that may have been more directed towards aerospace, but I never got quite to the bottom of that. But certainly in this area, we're not seeing any insolvency pressures. Payments seem to be good, and therefore, what our manufacturers are telling us is that they're actually in the middle of a margin squeeze, which Charlotte and John mentioned, but they're making money still. They've got fantastic demand, which Charlotte's order intake shows you. I have my suspicions that people aren't chasing the orders as much because they've got so much demand coming through. They've got a limitation on supply. They've got a limitation on the number of staff that they can get in. And therefore, there's a bit of hesitancy, if you like, to rush out to market and get further orders in. It'd be interesting to see what the next quarter's stats look like on that. But I think it's the orders are very strong. In terms of interest in UK businesses, I just finished with this point. Obviously, we have a corporate finance and an M&A team, and it's very pleasing to see that UK is still a very popular destination for capital. So there are plenty of US firms looking to purchase UK firms. There are a lot of German firms still interested in the UK market in terms of investing. And that all adds to the health of particularly the manufacturing sector, I'd say, because they are interested in those areas. And I'd say overall, it's a very strong period of time. And I think that shows through in Charlotte's statistics, and it certainly shows through in the feedback that I get as I talk to people as I go around the region virtually. So that pretty much draws together my thoughts, but over to you, John, if you want to guide us through any Q&A that we've got.
Thank you very much indeed, Keith, and you too, Charlotte. A couple of little things that spring to mind. I mean, see, with these UK orders currently sort of exceeding export orders, are we seeing, and I think you intimated it slightly in your presentations, do you think there's a shift towards buying UK, what we used to call buy British in the old days, but buying UK now?
It's some of it's due to availability of supply, John, as well, because there's the certainty of supply from a UK producer. and there's a need for a lot of people who use their sort of subcontractors to have that now in a reliable frame rather than it being disturbed by, say, a shipping pattern or air cargo. So they need the certainty of supply, and we're seeing a bit more of that. I wouldn't say it's certainly not a tsunami, but there's a strong feeling that if people can source it locally, then they do.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think there is an element of behaviours changing in procurement teams to think actually what is the real worst case scenario now, and certainly building inventory and making sure they've got dual source and local opportunities if those exist. I think it depends on the product as well. Frankly, certain things can't be sourced in the UK, and we're quite keen to make sure that that global narrative doesn't disappear. Whilst, of course, we want to support UK manufacturing, actually, we're part of long, complex global supply chains, and many businesses sort of say, oh, I don't want to go around sort of banging the drum too hard because I don't want to offend my customers and my suppliers. I'm part of this kind of global community.
Just add to that, quite a lot of manufacturers you see that do have this mix, so they'll mix in product that is being brought in from elsewhere, and as we all know, items are partially manufactured externally and then semi-processed when they get here, so it's sometimes difficult to establish what percentage it is.
More rules, more regulations. Yeah, going back to the skills that you were mentioning, Charlotte, I mean, the shortage of skills in certain abilities because there's a mismatch. Do we know what skill sets we're actually looking for now? Is there any evidence that tells us which direction that's going?
Yeah, I think it's, we can talk generally. Of course, each sector will have its own needs and specific requirements, but we are generally seeing a need to move away from level 3 to level 4 and 5 provision, and that's quite a difficult almost waltz to get right. We've got to make sure that education providers can deliver that, and that can be quite intense in terms of capital equipment, etc., for delivering manufacturing and engineering courses. So that then relies on the local employers wanting to invest and support those local education. So we kind of try and bring the two together, that positive collaboration between education and also business. We talk about green skills for the future, and we don't think that this is going to be a parachute in of brand new green jobs, but perhaps more a transition and an evolution of greening existing skill sets. The roles will remain technically very similar, but of course the products or part of the supply chain that those businesses are operating in likely to change. I think for us, one of the big concerns is apprenticeships. So only 47% of manufacturers took on an apprentice in the last 12 months, and only 57% plan to in the next 12 months. When we start to see that recovery in those very strategically important supply chains like automotive and aerospace, 3-4 years time, we're going to see a gap in the workforce that was needed to fulfill those roles. The last point I'd also raise is T levels, so technical equivalents to A levels, really what BTECs will transition into, going live in the near future for manufacturing and engineering. So those placements or those qualifications will require work placements for the students. So there's been some perhaps poorly shared information as to how that happens, how manufacturers can support students. It doesn't have to be in one big bulk, it can be throughout the curriculum, but we've got to get manufacturers ready to support those students because they cannot qualify through a T level without that industry placement.
I mean, it's all change out there. Obviously we're a university and our output are graduates, but we're seeing more and more demands with our knowledge transfer partnerships coming from manufacturing industries, looking for the graduates with those skill sets that perhaps are a bit lacking coming out of most universities. So yeah, there needs to be some retraining of graduates, I think, in the future going forward. And apprenticeships for graduates isn't such a bad thing, because advanced apprenticeships are very good indeed. And I think we could go down that road. Going back to the most predominant manufacturer in the east of England, which is food manufacture and food production. I mean, is it a good time to set up a food manufacturing business in the east of England?
I would say absolutely. Food and drink, I've got a real love for. It's the most resilient sector that we've got. It's the largest manufacturing sector that we've got. And the reason that I say these things is because whatever the sort of economic backdrop, we always feed ourselves and, you know, the kids and the dog and whatnot. Perhaps your buying patterns may alter, but food and drink really offers resilience to regions like Yorkshire and Humber, East Midlands, and the east of England, offers great and interesting employment opportunities. And also, if we look at the trends around sustainability, how plant proteins are coming much more into the diet, I think food and drink, there's a relatively low amount of R&D spent on the sector, and it produces quite a big increase in the output. So the more we can do that, it can really, really deliver some economic growth. We don't produce enough food to feed our nation. There is demand there. So absolutely, John, I love food and drink.
We see a lot of innovation at both ends. So innovation in the larger manufacturers, but also you get the small startups that are able to fill a gap, and they fill it very well. I mean, there are lots of examples, where people have actually now become suppliers to the main supermarkets, having just started in a few local corner shops almost effectively with their produce. So, there's certainly quite a lot of those I've watched over the years, and there seems to be a growing trend of it being easier to get out into those, or there's more acceptance, should I say, of those products. We do see quite a lot of innovation. Whether we're just lucky and we deal with some larger food producers who are very innovative, or whether we just see a lot of those smaller ones where they're bringing new products to market. And I think there is plenty of scope there. And as you say, I'm not even referring to any plant-based stuff there. So it's that's big on the agenda now, isn't it?
It is. We've certainly seen a lot of ideas, innovative ideas coming to us for investment, where they are food industry, food production related, but are more related to replacing the labouring workforce. Automated picking, automated carrying, identification of crops through high-res cameras and lenses, all brand spanking new. But funny enough, the lenses could be used in space as well. So there's all sorts of different use of optics coming into different kinds of sectors that we're seeing crossovers with, which is it's actually quite exciting for us to see the ingenuity of some of the ideas coming across. Yeah. So, are food producers adopting new technologies readily, or are they still a little bit reluctant and want to go back to old ways?
We've got some first-hand experience, and one of the questions in the Q&A, it perhaps starts to answer that question. We run Meet the Buyers to enable that connectivity between UK suppliers, and we focused on food and drink at the back end of last year, and we sat 300 meetings with some of the biggest brands, Budweiser, the people making Guinness, Samworth Brothers, Lush, who make the bath bombs. And the two key things that really came through very strong was future packaging, but also digital technology and automation. And it was amazing, actually. Even some of the biggest organisations just quite didn't know who to turn to and who to trust. So I think there's a great opportunity there for a kind of digital technology, Industry 4 type sector to really flourish and grow in the UK, but by doing so to also, make our UK manufacturing businesses more competitive. And rather than talking about replacing jobs, these are filling roles where we're not able to get those people, to be honest. These are gaps that are hindering that output, and this is about making businesses more competitive to then grow future employment.
How to get best of access to any regional incentives to manufacture in the UK? Where are the best routes to get those kind of access routes into regional incentives?
I'd firstly start talking to my local growth hub. So across the country, you've got a number of local enterprise partnerships, about 38, 39, but with them, they also have a growth hub, and this is a team that are there to support business. It's a private and public sector collaboration, but also local authorities all have an economic development team who want to understand the opportunities for growth. And there is a bit of a postcode lottery. It depends where you are. There may be a very good inward investment team as well. And I'd also say, get to know your local university, and what our members always say, their banker and their business advisor, i.e. their accountant, folks like Keith, are absolutely key. So that's where I would go. It depends on the discipline, because then there's a number of specialists that I turn to, people like the Manufacturing Technology Centre, or if it was food, I'd be going to the National Centre for Food Manufacturing. So, there is a bit of sector specificity, geographic kind of postcode lottery, but I think overall that would be my recipe book.
Yes, I think local growth hubs should be the font of all knowledge regarding regional schemes and national schemes. So, whether you're based in Guildford or in Colchester, there is a growth hub for you, and simply just look them up. Okay. So procurement teams often have difficulty in finding potential suppliers. I remember decades ago when there used to be a supplier matching service run by a government agency, which sadly disappeared. But is there more that can be done to help match procurement teams to potential suppliers?
Join Make UK. It's what I spend my days doing, building e-bikes, motorbikes, parts for ventilators. But actually, again, geographically and sector sort of specific, it does vary. There are some really amazing local clusters, like in New Anglia across Norfolk and Suffolk. There are supply chain tools that have been established. On sort of a national scale, we've lobbied the Department for Business to do some supply chain mapping in the UK, because actually, to enable the future growth, we need to spot where we've got those strategic gaps, or perhaps where we've got a weakening in supply chains that are maybe being hollowed out. But yeah, join Make UK will help.
Yeah, good answer. Okay. And I think I'm going to throw this one to you, Keith, because this might be right up your street. Any thoughts on vertical farms? They seem popular at the moment.
They do. And interestingly, vertical farm got approached about a year and a half ago by someone who was looking for funding and was getting into that. And yeah, it's I would say that people will look seriously at any new venture now. I think with the pandemic, with supply chain issues, that whether it's pandemic or Brexit, whichever it is, people will now look at those opportunities in a very different way, John. And yeah, that was something that came across me, but yeah, as I say, a little while ago. And I think that I wouldn't discount anything now in terms of what's fundable, because I think a lot of old market chains prejudice have been swept aside because of the difficulties everybody's having or has had.
I've certainly seen over the years excuse the pun, the rise of vertical farms, because they are definitely on the up, as they say. Sorry, guys, I do apologise in advance. But certainly, I think, with land being such a precious commodity, East Anglia has always surpassed the rest of the country in its use of land and the way that land has basically produced such good products for so long. But of course, now we're damaging the environment with all the pesticides and everything else that have been used, and the water courses and what have you. So it's all relevant now to help the green planet and to assist with the low carbon economy. So I think there's lots that we can still do. And I think a lot of the ideas that we're now getting coming to us are all in those areas where they could help manufacturers, help farmers. And when I say help manufacturers, everything from use of materials, packaging, you mentioned, Charlotte, Very, very important. We've got lots of people coming to us with ideas about packaging and eco-friendly stuff. And it's just getting, I mean, from our perspective, we're looking to raise investment for these businesses. But also, I think we need, and this is I'll put this one out there. We would like to see more larger companies coming forward, providing help and advice to these early stage businesses, because they could have a vested interest in them in an early stage and perhaps help with the research and development going forward. That, you know, let's face it, manufacturing is the biggest buyer of R&D in the UK. And, you know, we could certainly work more with manufacturers in that way. So just a couple of final words. I'm going to allow Charlotte and Keith just to tell us a bit more about Make UK and how you can contact Make UK, and also about BDO, the accountants, and how you can contact BDO. So Charlotte, over to you.
I'd encourage, please connect with us on LinkedIn, either directly with myself and or Make UK nationally. And also on Twitter, you'll find a wealth of knowledge that's coming out. So whether you're a business advisor, you're interested in the sector, or maybe you are a manufacturer, there's hopefully something for everybody. But please get involved. We're a force for good, and we are stronger together. So yeah, look forward to having some future conversations. And John, Josh, thank you for facilitating today.
Thank you so much, Charlotte. Keith, over to you.
Thanks, John. And of course, totally happy if people just want to email John and get themselves in touch with us. But it's keith.ferguson@bdo.co.uk, and in BDO's website, you'll find all sorts of interesting help and services that we provide. And I would just stress a lot of that is very directed towards the positive reliefs and the positive help you can get from, you know, sort of government strategy, and particularly talking about R&D, patent box, and a lot of other areas. And I do know that a lot of the queries we get nowadays is moving goods around in or out of the EU or wherever. So more than happy if people want to get in touch direct or through John. I have no GDPR worries about you, John, providing my email address to anybody direct, so feel free. It's been a pleasure presenting. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Keith. Yes, I've put into the chat box our uez@essex.ac.uk. So if you've got any questions at all of Charlotte or Keith, we are more than happy to pass those on for you if you can't contact them directly yourself. Thank you very much for our guest speakers today, to Charlotte Horobin from Make UK, from Keith Ferguson from BDO Accountants, and from Josh Clark, who's been managing the back room there very nicely indeed. Thank you, Josh. Thank you from me. I'm John Stenhouse, Business Support Manager, University of Essex, and that ends today's webinar. Thank you for attending. Goodbye.